Our third chapter is The English Come to Stay, 1600 to 1660. So between this time period, England transforms their scattered attempts at colonizing, and they create these permanent footholds in North America. So the era begins with the founding of Jamestown in 1607 and the Pilgrim settlement of Plymouth colony in 1620. So these two events marked the first successful English colonies. During these decades, English settlers struggled through famine, conflict, issues with native nations, political turmoil, and yet they laid solid foundations of societies that would help to shape the future United States. So their worlds were defined by these fragile alliances with native people. The rise of tobacco is going to be a huge source of their income, and the spread of these Puritan ideals in New England, and the early emergence of the systems like indentured servitude and slavery. This period also captures the moment when the English truly came to stay. So it's establishing communities in contested and rapidly changing land. All right, so after Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603, the English crown passes to James I. This marks the beginning of a new political era. One of his earliest decisions was to end England's long and costly war with Spain. So for decades, this conflict had fueled the English economy. Pirateers, shipbuilding, sailors, all depended on wartime profits. But with the signing of the peace treaty, this entire system collapses almost overnight. So, as far as economic opportunities that were once tied to warfare, they're gone. England needed a new outlet for ambition and expansion. So James I responds by granting charters in 1606 to establish colonies in North America. So these charters are going to open the door to English settlements across the Atlantic, and this will transform a national strategy at laying the foundation for what will become the British Empire in the New World. Because as you know, although they're late to the game, they come and take over the game. Okay, so let's start with the foundation of Jamestown in 1607. Like we've talked about before, it becomes the actual first permanent English settlement in North America. It's founded by the Virginia Company with the hopes of discovering wealth and expanding England's influence. But the reality is that the settlers encounter far harsher conditions than they had ever imagined. They come over very unprepared for what life really was like in the New World. They built their colonies on low, swampy land, believing it would be easy to defend. Instead, the location is going to expose them to contaminated water, swarms of mosquitoes. The soil will be too poor for farming. So disease is going to spread very quickly, and settlers who are unprepared for these extreme conditions and unprepared for the heat of the summer and the cold of the winter, they're going to suffer greatly. They're going to have food shortages. Um, they're going to lack farming experience. They're going to have poor planning in their settlements without enough food to survive. And as hunger gets worse, their malnutrition and illness is going to take hold of them. So the situation grew even more desperate as tensions with the Bataan Confederacy is going to escalate. So although they initially have help from the Native Americans, they're going to eventually have conflict, and colonists are going to make it worse by stealing food, and they're going to have violent clashes for these strained resources that they are going to try and take to survive. So by the time winter comes, 1609 to 1610, this is going to be known as the starving time. The colony is pushed to the brink of collapse. Out of roughly 500 settlers, they only have 60 who have survived. So Jamestown's early years were defined by conflict, by staggering loss, by all sorts of hardships. Yet, despite these overwhelming challenges, the settlement does endure, and it's going to mark the beginning of a lasting presence of the English in North America. All right, so one of the things that is going to help the English is going to be tobacco. So, despite their grim beginnings with Jamestown, in 1612, things start to really turn around with John Rolfe. He introduces a variety of tobacco that grew well in Virginia soil. And within just 3 years, the colony was sending over 50,000 pounds of tobacco to England. This is going to transform Jamestown into this rich colony. And people who had land and workers, which are going to be indentured servants at this time, they could make far more money, up to 5 times more money than those who weren't in Virginia. But this success is going to cause more people to want to come to Virginia. So the Virginian Company is going to promise settlers the same rights as the people in England. And within 3 years, they're going to have over 3,500 new settlers arrive in Jamestown. So tobacco gave the colony a steady income and is going to turn everything around and help it survive. It's also going to make Jamestown less dependent on the different Indian tribes living around them for food and trade. So this crop is going to become Jamestown's lifeline. So as the tobacco exports grew, the colony began to prosper. Eventually, it's going to transform from this fragile little settlement into this economic thriving venture. So while success came at a great human cost, Jamestown's story is going to end as a very powerful lesson in resilience, innovation, and it's going to have very complicated roots in American history, but it's going to show the perseverance of these people who wanted to create a better life. Okay, so between 1600 and 1646, you have English settlers in Jamestown, and the Pohonk Indians are going to fight 3 major conflicts known as the Anglo-Pohonk Wars. These wars are caused mainly by the competition for land and resources, because the English are going to move in more and more on the Indians' land. So tensions really begin to rise over the English demands to return some captives during this war. And the chief is going to refuse. And in response to that, the English are going to kill 75 people, burning their villages and cornfields, and even throwing children overboard during this return to Jamestown. The second Pohonk War in 1622-1626 is going to break out due to struggles over territory, and that's going to lead to heavy losses on both sides. And then the Third War, 1644 to 1646, is going to be kind of the downfall of the Pohonk resistance and the expansion of the English colonial control. So once there had been political strength through strategic marriages, but these repeated wars is going to weaken their power and their influence over the region, and that's when the English really step in and take over. Maryland was founded in 1632, and it's better known as being established by Lord Baltimore, and it's going to be named in honor of Queen Mary. So from the beginning, the colony stood out as a colony that was committed to religious tolerance. In 1649, you have the Act of Toleration, guaranteeing that no settler could be forced to follow any particular faith, making Maryland one of the first places in the English world to legally protect religious freedom. Like its neighbor, Virginia, Maryland's economy is going to revolve around tobacco. The crop is going to bring wealth to the colony. It's going to encourage growth of plantations across its land, and settlers are going to enjoy a degree of self-government and personal freedom that was very unusual at this time. And it's going to give them more control over their daily lives and local affairs. As far as the Native American resistance, it's weakened due to conflict, disease, and displacement. Because remember, the English are just going to, well, all the settlers are just going to keep on taking more and more territory of the Indians. Some more land is going to become available for the English settlement, and this expansion is going to help Maryland grow quickly. It's going to be shaped into a very prosperous and influential colony. And together with the religious tolerance, the tobacco wealth, and this political autonomy, it's going to make Maryland a very distinctive part of the early American landscape. During the 1600s, you have the Chp3 region, especially Virginia and Maryland. They're going to develop as a political economy shaped by four very powerful forces: a weak government, booming tobacco prices, abundance of land, and this ever-growing demand for labor. So colonial governments were very fragile and very disorganized, and they weren't able to regulate plantation agriculture effectively. So this is going to allow wealthy landowners to really dominate politics and pursue profit with almost no oversight. Tobacco quickly becomes the engine of the region's economy. It's driving rapid expansion as planters claim more and more land to increase their production. But the success of the tobacco, it creates a constant crisis. There were never enough workers, even though around 50,000 Britons migrated to the Chesapeake area by 1660. You still had harsh conditions, you had disease, and you still had poor living standards. And so out of that 50,000, you only had 35,000 who survived. So there's still a labor shortage, and the labor shortage was severe. Some colonists are going to attempt to enslave Native Americans. Often they would do this by purchasing prisoners of war from different rival tribes. But the native population were limited and were very resistant to meet the colonial needs. In 1619, you have a turning point when you're going to have enslaved Africans arrive in Virginia. So at first, slavery was not yet fully racialized. Many early African laborers were treated similar to other non-Christian foreigners. But as tobacco profits grew and the demand for permanent labor intensifies, the system is going to harden. Over time, racism in slavery, they're going to become more connected and more one. They're going to intertwine to transform the African worker into a lifelong enslaved part of the property. So by the mid 1600s, slavery had become the colony's central solution to its labor shortage. So the combination of a weak government, vast land, these soaring tobacco profits, which ensured that the plantation's agriculture and systems were supported. And those systems are going to be supported by racial slavery. And this is going to define the Chesapeake region for generations. Okay, continuing discussing this region. Let's talk about gender roles, which are very sharply defined at this time. You had many single women who were transported from England specifically to become wives and to help stabilize the society, which was overwhelmingly male. Men were expected to handle all outdoor labor, while women were responsible for domestic tasks such as cooking, cleaning, and making clothing. But as the tobacco economy expanded, its demand for labor grew so intense that these boundaries began to blur. Women and even children were often pulled into the exhausting work of the tobacco fields. Only wealthier families could afford to maintain traditional gender roles. So when men had enough money to hire servants or laborers, their wives were spared from the field work and could focus on running the household. Still, early Virginians lacked many of these domestic comforts. Women typically produced fresh food, handmade garments, and even basic necessities like soap. Um, in contrast to the New England colonies, such as Plymouth, founded in 1620, and Massachusetts Bay, founded in 1629, those colonies developed very differently. These settlements were created by people seeking religious freedom, and they built tightly organized faith-centered communities. So unlike Cheeks Bay, New England experienced experienced rapid population growth not through immigration but through natural reproduction. Families were larger, healthier, and more stable, which helped create a society with clearer household structure and much stronger community bonds. So, together, these regions revealed how environment and the economy and purpose actually are going to shape the colonial family life. In the Cheeks Bay, survival and labor needs often overrode these traditional roles, while in New England, religious ideology and healthier conditions allowed for more structured family life and traditional family life to take root. So we have the English origins of the Church of England. Okay, this is going to kind of discuss the roots of the Puritan movement. So this is going to go all the way back to the 1530s with King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII is going to break away from the Catholic Church. So after the Pope refuses to grant him annulment, which would be a divorce because he wants to marry other women, his solution is going to be control his own religion and his political destiny. So King Henry created the Church of England. He placed himself at the head, not the Pope, but he is at the head of the church. So the decision ignited over 130 years of religious conflict. Power shifted repeatedly between the Catholic and Protestant rulers because at the time the king decided what religion you were, either Catholic or Protestant, and again, Protestant means not Catholic. Each new monarchy tried to reshape the English religion in their own image. So as a result, you had just this widespread persecution, and it's going to be targeted at whoever is in charge, whatever religion it is at the time, which was determined by whoever sat on the throne. So at this time, you're going to have the Puritans emerge. They were Protestants who believed in the Church of England, they believed the Church of England looks too much like the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church that Henry had left behind. So they wanted a more simpler, more Bible-centered form of worship, and they're going to push for deep reforms. Their criticism in England is going to make them targets of the government, and they're going to be harassed. So as their persecution intensifies, Puritans choose to leave England as a group together to go to a place where they feel they can practice their faith freely and build a community that is based on their biblical beliefs and biblical principles. So their desire for religious independence is ultimately going to be why the Puritans crossed the Atlantic and they lay a foundation for new colonies that they would establish in New England. The Pilgrims were a small group of English separatists. They believed the Church of England was beyond saving. They're convinced it was corrupt. They chose a radical path, complete separation, where the Puritans wanted to reform. The Pilgrims want full separation from the church. So they're facing prosecution at home, England, and they leave England in search of a place where they can worship freely according to their religious convictions. In 1620, they're going to land in Plymouth and they're going to create the Plymouth colony. Their settlement is going to be very fragile and it's built strictly on determination rather than wealth. They want to create, they're not wanting to create expansion. They're wanting to create survival to build this religious community. So the Pilgrims were fewer in number. They have very humble resources, but they are deeply committed to their faith. In order to maintain some type of governance in this land, they create the Mayflower Compact. It's a simple but groundbreaking agreement for the time in which the settlers pledge to govern themselves through majority rule. So the majority will rule. It's established as a foundation of corporation and self-government, and it's held that the colony together through its harshest years, so it did work. So you have life in Plymouth as being very difficult. The Pilgrims face brutal winters, disease, food shortages, yet their strong sense of community and shared religious purpose are going to really hold them tightly together and help them endure through all these different issues. Their colony does remain small, but it becomes a symbol of religious independence and perseverance in the New World. Okay, so then you have the Puritans that came to New England with a strong religious mission. They reject the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and they believe every person should be able to read and interpret the Bible on their own. So their convictions are different than the Pilgrims because they believe that everybody should interpret the Bible on their own. They are going to be very strong on literacy. They're going to encourage Bible translation in everyday language. They're going to build schools to ensure that everybody could read the scripture. Puritan churches were very strict communities. Only the saved, those who could prove a true spiritual conversion, were allowed full church membership, and this is going to become an issue down the road. The Puritans believed that they had been chosen by God to build a biblical society in the New World, a model Christian community that would serve as the city upon the hill. So in 1629, 1630, the Puritans established the Massachusetts Bay Colony under a royal charter granted to the Massachusetts Bay Company. This charter gave them a very unusual independence and allowed them to govern themselves according to their religious ideals. So by the end of 1630, they had founded Boston and several nearby towns. So unlike the Cheeks Bay Colony, which were filled mostly with single men, the Puritans migrated as families. This led to a very rapid natural population growth and the creation of a very stable, tight-knit community. Their emphasis on faith, education, and moral discipline is what's going to shape the Massachusetts Bay. And this is going to be known as a Bible Commonwealth, where the Bible guided government law and everyday life. The New England way referred to the Puritans' vision for a godly society, deeply rooted in their religious beliefs and community values. The first governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony is John Winthrop. He saw their mission as a spiritual one. He preached that the Puritans had entered into a covenant with God, and they were actually tasked with creating a society built firmly on biblical principles. While Puritan society emphasized a sense of spiritual equality before God, a social hierarchy still shaped their daily life. Only male landowners held the authority to vote and handle town affairs, creating a civic system that was tied directly to land ownership and church involvement. So for the Puritan, the values weren't just spiritual, they extended to the political economy as well. Land ownership was central. The belief that land should belong to the individual who developed and improved it gave settlers a very powerful incentive to transform their environments. Forest was cleared for lumber, which became a thriving industry in the area. So by the 1800s, the ecological impact of this land, driven by economy, was stark. Southern New England's forests were largely depleted, along with much of the native wildlife. The region's cold climate made large-scale cash crop farming unfeasible. So Puritans leaned into manufacturing and small-scale farming instead of going with more of an industrial shift like New England was. The Puritan family and social order in New England, the family was the cornerstone of both the economy and the moral structure, same as in America. So you had families that were large, often with 8 or 9 children. They functioned within a very strict hierarchy that mirrored Puritan society as a whole. The father held ultimate authority, and obedience was expected from all members of the household. Emotional excess, particularly maternal affection and sentiment, was viewed with suspicion. It was believed that spoiled children were very weak and undisciplined. Children were raised under firm guidance with an emphasis on obedience, hard work, and spiritual obedience. While Puritans aimed to build this unified, godly society, they did struggle with internal contradictions, trying to balance emotional intellect, personal faith, and communal control. The belief in this spiritual equality with this rigid social hierarchy, these two are going to conflict, and they're really going to emerge as two very distinct voices. So up comes Roger Williams. He arrives in Massachusetts Bay Colony about a year after its founding. He's a very passionate, independent thinker, and he begins to openly question these colonial policies, including this the fidelity of the Massachusetts Charter and the merging of the church and the civil authority. So Williams argues for a very strict separation of church and state, that the church should be one and the state should be something else, and the church shouldn't be the governing body of the state. So this is a radical stance in a society that is built on religious uniformity. So the colony responds with hostile threats to him. They send him to England for execution, but instead, Williams and his followers, they flee and they establish the Rhode Island community in 1944. And this is a colony that's going to become this refugee for any dissenters, and it's going to be this foundation for religious liberty in America. So another person who's going to come to light is Anne Hutchinson. She's a very well-educated midwife and a mother of 12. She presents an even deeper challenge to the Puritan leadership. Through Puritanism, granted women spiritual respect and maintained that they were to be subordinate in public life. So Hutchinson defied these norms by holding popular religious meetings in her home, and she challenges the doctrine of preparation, which stated that individuals had to prove their salvation through moral behavior. She goes on to shock authorities by claiming that God spoke directly to her, bypassing the male ministers and the church structures altogether. So, fearing the social disruption her views would cause, colonial leaders tried to undermine her and the clergy that she begins. So she was convicted and banished from Massachusetts, and her case just kind of illustrates how the Puritans sought liberty to practice their own religion, but then actually denied it to others who attempted to do that. Okay, so here you just have a breakdown of the difference between the Pilgrims and the Puritans in the different categories. All right, the last thing we're going to look at is the Puritans' Indian policy and the Peacock War. So this is our last slide. So as the Puritans' settlements rapidly expanded across New England, and this is going to be an issue ongoing, settlers are going to keep on encroaching on Native American lands. So many of the indigenous tribes are already reeling from disease, displacement, and they're done. They have no intention on surrendering any more of their homelands. So you're going to have tensions mount as English settlers driven by this religious ideology and land ownership, that they should take the land for religious reasons. This is just going to push further and further into tribal territories. So the Peacock Wars are 1636 to 1638. And they are going to be rooted in this overlapping conflict of English settlers fought over who would control the valuable Connecticut River Valley for this particular war, while native tribes competed over trade alliances with European powers. So these tensions erupt into this violence when English colonists, along with their native allies, launch a campaign against the powerful Peacock tribe. The war is going to be a brutal attack on the Peacock village of Mystic. Hundreds were killed, and the Peacock people were devastated. Survivors were enslaved and scattered amongst rival tribes. So effectively, this is going to end the Peacocks as a cohesive political and cultural entity.